So, good morning, everyone in Germany and in London, and good evening, everyone in Australia and Asia. It's my pleasure to welcome you all here today to this short webinar on behalf of the German Mineral Resources Agency, Trade and Investment Queensland, and the Competence Centre for Mining and Resources at the Australian-German Chamber of Industry and Commerce in Sydney. I hope the weather has improved in Sydney by now. My name is Zia. I work for the German Mineral Resources Agency, which is part of the Federal Institute for Geoscience and Natural Resources. And together with Linda from TIQ, I will guide you through this webinar and the discussion later on. Before I hand over to Linda, I would like to thank BDE, FAB, VDMA, Austrade, and the Australian Embassy in Berlin for supporting this event today. And if you do have questions later on, please use the chat function because your microphones are muted. And yeah, I'm happy to hand over to Linda and looking forward to have a great webinar.
Thank you very much, Si, and thank you very much to everybody for joining us for this really important seminar this morning. It's such a pleasure to be able to work in partnership with peak German industry bodies, our Austrade colleagues, and also, of course, the Embassy based in Berlin. Before we get into the actual formal proceedings today, I would like to acknowledge the presence of His Excellency Mr. Philip Green, OAM, Australian Ambassador to Germany, Dr. Thomas Gackler, Deputy Director General, Raw Materials Policy, German Federal Ministry of Economic Affairs and Energy, our Austrade colleagues, TIQ colleagues, German chambers, peak mining, engineering and resource bodies. It will be soon my pleasure to introduce Queensland's Chief Geologist, Tony Knight, and also Dr. Helen Dagling, leading Queensland geoscientists, who will be our guests of honour and key speakers today. So with that, those opening remarks, it's my pleasure now to return to Sire, who will be our chair and lead us through the agenda today. I should say also, just in terms of my role, I'm the Agent General for the State of Queensland based in London, and also the Trade and Investment Commissioner for Queensland. And our particular interests at the moment are energy supply, renewable energy supply, but also energy storage, hence our seminar today, which is focusing on the new mineral economy. Thank you, Sire.
Thank you very much, Linda. It is now my pleasure to introduce His Excellency Mr. Philip Green. Mr. Philip Green is Australia's ambassador to Germany, Switzerland and Liechtenstein. He was previously Australia's High Commissioner in Kenya, South Africa and Singapore, and in his last assignment in Canberra, he led implementation of Australia's Indo-Pacific strategy. And before that, he served as international advisor to Australian Prime Minister Rudd and as Chief of Staff when Mr. Rudd was Foreign Minister. So please, Mr. Green.
Well, thank you very much, Sire, and good morning and good evening to everyone. It's my very great privilege and pleasure on behalf of the Australian Government to support this event, and particularly to congratulate and thank Queensland and TIQ for drawing this important issue to greater prominence and to engaging with good friends in Europe, including those in Germany, on how we might go forward together to build more capabilities globally and regionally on critical minerals. In the critical minerals endeavour, the Australian Government works in extremely close partnership with the states and territories. And today's event is an emblem of the very close engagement that we have with Queensland and the very great support that Australia, through the Critical Minerals Facilitation Office, through Export Finance Australia, through the many mechanisms that we have to support critical minerals development, operates closely in unison with the states. Another key element there is the work that Australia's Austrade offices around Australia and around the world do to engage with states like Queensland to build new capabilities. Now, I'm looking forward to today's seminar, particularly because it's a fascinating area where there is a lot, at least for me, that is unknown. And it seems to me that there is a future out there, but exactly how we get to it is not perfectly clear. We all know that critical minerals are important for future-facing manufacturing. We all know that we need more diverse supply chains, both regionally in the Indo-Pacific and globally. And we all know that Australia, not least Queensland, has substantial reserves. Australia is already the second largest producer of lithium on the planet. And we all know that Germany is a very big end user of critical minerals. But the question, how can Australia and Germany partner? How can Australia and Queensland partner to help to resolve the supply chain problem that we all suffer from? Is a question which is still open in my mind. And for that reason, I'll be delighted to hear from the experts today how we can chart our way to an even more engaged future on critical minerals between Australia, Queensland and Germany. Thank you very much and congratulations again, Queensland.
Our next speaker is Mr. Thomas Gekle. Since 2011, Mr. Thomas Gekle is Deputy Director General for Raw Material Policy in the Federal Ministry of Economic Affairs and Energy. Mr. Gekle is responsible for the implementation of the German National Raw Materials Strategy, and last year the Cabinet adopted the revised version of the strategy. So please, Mr. Gekle.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction, Mr. Albarrasi. Your Excellency, Mr. Ambassador Green, Mrs. Apel, Mr. Knight, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Federal Ministry of Economic Affairs and Energy, I should also like to welcome you to today's webinar on new economy minerals in Queensland. And also I should like to thank our hosts, Trade and Investment Queensland, the German Raw Material Agency, and our Competence Centre for Mining and Resources at the German Australian Chamber of Industry and Commerce for organizing this event. New economy minerals, or critical raw materials as we call them, are crucial, not only for Germany, but also for the European economy as a whole. They form an indispensable base for future technologies like e-mobility, energy transition, or digitization. And their demand is increasing steadily, since they are key, essential to master to buttress the transition towards a green and digital economy. For us in the European Union, a reliable and unhindered access to these materials is of outstanding or major importance. This is particularly the case for Germany, as we are highly dependent on imports of a whole bunch of raw materials. To reduce the dependency on third countries and to diversify the supply from both primary and secondary resources, the European Union and Germany have launched several measures. With regard to the European Union, I should like to mention, for example, the European Action Plan on Critical Raw Materials. The list of critical raw materials that increases steadily. We have now reached 30 different kinds of minerals that are considered to be critical in supply. And for example, the ERMA, the European Raw Material Alliance. All these measures aim to make Europe more resilient, secure, and sustainable. As a consequence, also the German government took action and adopted, for example, early last year, a new raw material strategy. Our objectives are in line with the European ones and aim at supporting companies in their endeavors for a secure and sustainable supply of raw materials, and thus strengthening the competitiveness of our industry. This in mind, I highly welcome today's opportunity for a deeper exchange, since I'm convinced we share several key factors of mutual interest. Not only that Australia and Queensland in particular are blessed with an abundance of raw materials, we also have a common understanding of responsible sourcing of responsible sourced minerals. And this is without doubt a general precondition of growing importance. On the other hand, there is the impressive potential of German mining and technology suppliers and engineering firms, of which we will get an impression during today's discussion. They offer highest quality as well as energy efficient and sustainable solutions. This is definitely an excellent base for a perfect match and new collaborations with mining companies from Queensland. So I very much hope that this webinar will serve as a kickoff for further discussions and fruitful collaborations between Queensland and Germany. And so for this reason, I thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Geckle. And thank you very much again, Mr. Ambassador. Linda, I would highly appreciate if you could introduce Chief Geologist Tony Knight now.
Thank you very much, Si. It's my absolute pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker today, Mr. Tony Knight, who is the Chief Geologist for the Queensland Government. Tony has an international reputation as being having high levels of expertise in the whole field of geology, a geoscientist, and in particular, in more recent times, expertise in being able to analyse and make sense of the whole new mineral economy and what that means for the world going forward. And I really like to hear what Tony says, because it makes a lot of sense in the context over here of building back a greener, fairer and more sustainable economy. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my absolute pleasure to now introduce Queensland's Chief Geologist, Mr. Tony Knight. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you, Linda, and good morning, everyone. Good morning, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's a very great pleasure to have this opportunity to meet you today, and I thank the German Mineral Resources Agency, German Australian Chamber of Industry and Commerce, and our Trade and Investment Queensland office in Europe for bringing us together. I think it's those words, bringing us together, that underline what I hope we can begin today, which is to lay the foundation for a long-term business partnership to face the needs, the challenges, and over time, to realise the many opportunities that lie before us and which Europe has expressed so well with the framework of the Green Deal. We use the term new economy to describe those same changes, with our framing aligning very well with the European Green Deal. I think that partnership would grow in stages, with ultimate aim to build knowledge and confidence for future investment into and supply from Queensland. But before I go on, I'd like to share a short introduction by Minister for Resources, Scott Stewart.
Well, good morning and welcome. As Queensland's Minister for Resources, it's my great pleasure to introduce today's event. Today is about building awareness and building relationships with a view to working together to achieve the goals of sustainable economic prosperity. We've been watching world events very carefully, especially the changes in energy, sustainability, and increasingly rising concerns over the security of supply. We are aware of these shifts underway in Europe in response to these world events. The idea of the Green Deal and your aim to turn climate and environmental challenges into opportunities, and noting the need to bring along people onto that change journey as part of the just transition. We think Queensland can play a key part in realising that ambition, which is what we will discuss today. In the uncertainty of COVID-19, international buyers and investors continue to look for trusted allies and suppliers with strong environmental credentials, and you'll find that right here in Queensland. Thinking ahead, my government has positioned the resources sector as a key component of our economic recovery roadmap. This work involves unlocking more mineral resources, getting these resources to market in a quick and timely manner, making it cheaper for existing projects and making it more cost effective for new projects, and sharing with our international partners our reputation as a leader in environmental, social and governance credentials. We have a bold brief, but if the past years of resource sector is anything to go by, these goals in our vision will position Queensland as a global resources leader well into the future. I thank you for your time and look forward to future opportunities to advance our mutual interests in achieving sustainable prosperity.
Okay, so let me start at the first stage. Simply to develop understanding of the operating and investment environment in Queensland, to discover whether and how we align with European wants and needs, and where we are heading on the path towards supplying critical minerals for the new Green Deal. The second stage is to develop and maintain a shared and ongoing awareness of the current state of the mineral sector in Queensland. It is large, diverse and dynamic, which calls for the strong industry intelligence capability to understand how it works. The third stage is to gain insight into works that are needed, planned or in progress to develop new sources of supply. In saying that, our field of view has expanded to encompass supply as part of an ecosystem, broader than the past focus on volume, cost and price alone, and adding sustainability, just transition, traceability, and life cycle assessment of mineral usage into the valuation too. The fourth stage is to establish means to identify and act on opportunities for future investment or commercial activity more broadly. As those new sources of supply are developed, you will note that I've used the words new sources of supply a few times already. I use it in broad terms because what I mean is that we need to develop new supply chains, or more properly, supply ecosystems. I'll come back to this point in more detail later, but to explain briefly, while we have a long history of producing base and precious metals, copper, lead, zinc, bauxite, gold and silver, with well-established infrastructure to move as commodities from mine to market, it is not the same for many minerals needed to support the Green Deal. Take, for example, rare earth elements, much in demand for automotive, defence and medical applications, amongst many others. Queensland has a very large and rich resources and companies seeking to develop them, but there is little or no infrastructure in place to process, refine and add value to those rare earth minerals. And in all this, we can't simply borrow from the past either, since the new economy is calling for different ways of doing business, which leads me back to stage one, to understand the operating and investment environment in Queensland. But before I go on further, let me start by showing you a quick video of the actual on-the-ground operating environment with some images of activities across our mineral sector to give you a sense of the size and activities of the state. The current Queensland government was recently re-elected for the third time in October 2020 for a period of 4 more years. The instruction given by our Premier, Palaszczuk, to our Minister for Resources, Scott Stewart, directed him to continue to support the development of the resources sector, including new economy minerals, and to provide clearer pathways for investment into new economy minerals exploration and development. Similarly, the Australian federal government included in its 2021 financial year budget a national priority for growth of our resources technology and critical minerals processing capability. Further, in 2020, the federal government established the Critical Minerals Facilitation Office, which, as its name suggests, is an agency tasked to help develop new supply chains for critical minerals, or what we in Queensland call new economy minerals, and which in practical terms refer to the same group of minerals. More recently, the federal government announced its modern manufacturing initiative, once again, including focus on resources technology and critical minerals processing. We would like to see more value-adding and manufacturing activities in Queensland, not only for economic benefit, but also with a view to shifting away from shipping of bulk materials to minimise what we might call mineral miles, to steal a phrase from the food supply sector. That shift would see as much processing done as close to source as makes good sense. So let me work through the 4 stages I mentioned a moment ago to give some more colour and light to our proposal. Stage 1 is to develop an understanding of the operating investment environment in Queensland, whether it aligns with European wants and needs, where we're heading in terms of responding to the imperatives of sustainable prosperity, people, planet, profit and progress. To look back before we look forward to what you might call our old economy, Queensland's history and success has in large part been heavily dependent on the mineral and energy resources sector. Some of its products are in long-term decline, our coal and gas sectors most notably, whereas others, like copper, will continue to play an important part into the future. Others, like lead, zinc and bauxite, will remain important to industry for a long time to come. But we know that we're in transition to a new economy, as we call it, where global shifts in energy, in industry and sustainability are fundamentally changing the pillars of our global economy. The energy transition from past reliance on combustion to much greater direct capture and storage of renewable energy, coupled with cleaner fuels and greater energy efficiency, is driving profound change and demand for the range of minerals needed to support that transition. In industry, we are in the 4th industrial revolution, the digital revolution. And some argue that the widespread rollout of artificial intelligence is in itself the start of the 5th industrial revolution. But in our view, which I'm sure is fully aligned with that of Europe, is that the embrace of sustainability is the key driver of change. It is a driver of change in our primary energy systems and actions on addressing climate change. It is a driver of the inherent logic in making better use of what we have and what we use, as embedded by the concept of the circular economy. And most importantly for our global economy, it is the drive of a fundamental change in the way investment capital is deployed and how the costs and benefits of economic development are balanced between the pillars of sustainable prosperity. So when Queensland uses the term new economy, it is recognising and accepting the changes that are underway and seeking to find the best path to the future in terms of policy, industry development, partnerships, collaboration and innovation, and working towards sustainable prosperity. I strongly believe that we are very much aligned with what we see happening in Europe through institutions such as the European Union, European Commission, and United Nations in particular. The Queensland government sees the greatest material need and greatest opportunity is the energy transition. That's why we've developed a hydrogen industry strategy centred on production of green hydrogen, and hopefully many of you would have heard of when it was showcased in Europe last year. That's why in our mineral sector, we see electrification as so important, with our ability to supply many of the minerals needed across electricity generation, transmission, and storage systems. Of course, that is easier said than done, and is very much a work in progress. But our policy settings, our strong regulatory frameworks towards safety, environmental protection, respect for Indigenous and non-Indigenous interests in land, and the rule of law make Queensland a progressive, safe and renewable energy-rich place to source materials and manufacture product. Of course, we, like many other destinations, seek to foster development, but also recognise that the traditional market-led model of development may not be able to move quickly enough to build the capacity required to meet demand for the minerals needed for the new economy. That is why we're exploring the idea of establishing long-term strategic partnerships with like-minded jurisdictions. It's also why we've been talking to the newly established European Raw Materials Alliance, amongst others. And we know that it is important to build supply systems suited to the Green Deal, energy efficient, minimal environmental footprint, and with safe, responsible and traceable production. Let me turn now to stage 2 to give an overview of the current state of the mineral sector in Queensland. In terms of mineral potential, we have a rich endowment with a long list of critical or new economy minerals. Those minerals are concentrated mainly in our northwest and northeast minerals provinces, from Mount Isa in the west to Townsville in the east, a distance of about 1,000 kilometres. The Northwest Minerals Province hosts the famous Mount Isa mines, some of the richest and longest lived base metal mines in the world. The complexion of the exploration, development and mining sector in the Queensland mineral sector is very, very diverse, with more than 580 companies holding exploration tenure alone. It's interesting to see, look at those companies in terms of market capitalisation. As you might imagine, there are a few large multinational corporations, amongst them Anglo American, Glencore, Rio Tinto, Teck, amongst others. There are a few we call mid-tier companies with a market capitalisation in the order of $1 billion. Example in Australia is one called Oz Minerals. But the vast majority of companies are what we call juniors, with modest market capitalisation, often less than $100 million, and quite often less than $30 million. With modest cash reserves and who must frequently go to market seeking new injections of cash and capital. But the junior sector holds a vast majority of tenure in Queensland, more than 80%, and they are energetic explorers. The past focus on base and precious metals and development has meant that in many cases, new economy minerals were not the primary focus of exploration. Hence, there is a large amount of activity underway to more fully delineate the quantity and quality of deposits. Some current examples: Multicom Resources with their St Elmo project for vanadium, Aeon Metals, Walter Creek project for cobalt, Centrex Metals Ardmore project, rare earth elements, EQ Resources, Mount Carbine, tungsten, Australian Mines, Scone project, scandium and nickel, amongst many, many, many others. I thought it worth highlighting the work of some German companies and entities active in Queensland and Australia too. Chronoment Australia, Pure Battery Technologies and Centrelest are all active here. The details of these and many other current projects are available in investment prospectus documents prepared by the Queensland Government and another by a national industry level body representing explorers and developers of new economy minerals. The junior exploration model, where junior explorers make a discovery and then sell or are taken over by a larger entity, has worked well for a long time, but it is a model not well suited to developing new and diverse supply chains, particularly for minerals that may be distributed more broadly than base metal deposits such as Mount Isa, which were of a size to sustain operations for many decades and of a value to fund development of large-scale infrastructure. A different approach is needed, which provides a convenient segue to talk now about stage 3. What is needed, planned, or in progress in Queensland to foster development of new supply chains? In terms of industry-led projects, there are a number in progress. For example, the Copper String project, which has the backing of the Queensland Government, is working to extend connection to the national electricity market in a corridor from Townsville to Mount Isa. The aim of this project is to reduce the development and operating costs of projects along that corridor by providing electricity from the national market, rather than relying on local generation. Access to competitively priced power has been a cost impediment to projects, especially new projects, so Copper String is certainly a step in the right direction. In terms of downstream processing, a battery gigafactory at the feasibility stage for construction by the Imperium 3 Townsville entity. A final investment decision is planned for June 2021, with operations commence in early 2024 if approved. Another energy-focused development is planned for Townsville 2, where Sun Metals, a subsidiary of Korea Zinc Company, has announced it would build a green hydrogen plant as part of a renewable energy complex to power its refining operations. All of those projects have benefited from funding support by either or both the Queensland and federal government. And looking ahead, The Queensland Government is also working to help establish new supply chains guided by a precincts strategy. The idea is to establish an upstream precinct centred on the Mount Isa region and focus on extraction and primary processing, and a downstream precinct centred on Townsville and focus on refining, value adding and export. This would help guide government decision-making and actions, for example, for land set aside for infrastructure development. The downstream precinct at Townsville will be served by the large export facility at the Port of Townsville. And in a pleasing example of alignment in terms of modern approach, the Port Management Corporation has recently released its 2050 vision, which has a clear focus on sustainable prosperity. So a good fit with our ambitions to develop end-to-end supply chains that incorporate sustainability in their design and operation. Our plans to develop our new economy mineral sector is aligned with federal government initiatives too. In particular, the Critical Minerals Facilitation Office in terms of design and operation of new supply chains. The work of that group has been bolstered by the federal government's Modern Manufacturing Initiative too. We're working closely with industry and various government bodies to establish a vanadium supply ecosystem at the moment. And Northwest Minerals Province hosts a huge vanadium resource, and we are working to bring it to market very soon. We see vanadium as one of the three key areas of advantage of Queensland, the others being rare earth elements and cobalt. In both cases, we are trialling new techniques to recover those minerals in alternate ways. For example, we have research underway using biological processes, such as hyperaccumulator plants, to concentrate rare earth elements. Similarly, we are trialling alternate recovery methods for cobalt, with focus on mine waste and tailings in particular, given that we have large resources in former mines across the Northwest. This work is indicative of our focus on bringing innovation to bear, once again to improve efficiency, reduce costs, and reduce environmental impact. Let me turn now to what is the most important part, stage 4. The fourth stage is simply to be positioned to take action, to know when opportunities can be realised. Of course, that can only be done with having all of the required information, and that what stage 4 is intended to do. We know we don't have all the information we need today, or all the enabling elements to make an investment decision today, but it will grow over time. So the aim of stage 4 is to let you track developments as they progress, to give you time to build confidence and understanding of all the features that may influence a decision to realise opportunity or to secure supply. Fundamentally, it speaks to the rationale for developing a business partnership to achieve mutual benefit, with an eye to the costs of developing new supply chains, perhaps a way to share risk and reward. A first step would be to put in place an agreement to cooperate at government or industry association level, a memorandum of understanding, or indeed any mechanism that works to have mutual benefit and serves to bring us together. And you might say, should that be between Germany and Australia? And indeed, there is no problem with having that sort of agreement. But Australia's model of government sees the individual states and territories charged with primary responsibility for the mineral resources. Hence why an agreement and a working relationship more broadly at state level is the model best able to drive development and deliver outputs and outcomes. So I'll finish now having made that offer to commence building a partnership with Queensland with aim to develop new supply chains and not only deliver the minerals needed for the new economy and for the future, but to do that in a way that is reliable, responsible, and ethical. Thank you for your time today and your interest. We have time for questions, of course, and there are some contact details here for our TRQ office in Europe, and of course, us back here in Australia. Thank you, see you.
Thank you very much, Tony, for your presentation. Yeah, as Tony said, we do have time for 1 or 2 questions. So if you do have a question, please just post them in the chat. Meanwhile, Tony, I would have a question. Just to confirm, did I understand you right that there's a battery gigafactory plant in Queensland?
Yes, that's right. It's called Imperium 3 is the name of the entity developing it. It's to be developed in Townsville.
Okay, thank you. Interesting. I didn't know that. And I do have another question. Queensland had a 4-year strategic resources exploration program that concludes this year, as far as I know. Is there something similar planned for the future, and who can participate in it?
The Strategic Resources Exploration Program is a government-led, government-funded program to really drive new discoveries of particularly base metals like copper foremost. We have running concurrently another similar program that we call the New Economy Minerals Initiative. A lot of the work we're doing in vanadium and cobalt and rare earths and scandium and so on is under that initiative too. So they're running concurrently, and they're both led by Dr. Degeling.
As you all know, Australia is one of the world's leading mining countries, exporting a wide range of mineral and energy resources. And Germany, on the other side, is a major importer of raw materials and a world-class exporter of mining equipment, technology, and services. And accordingly, we have invited for today's discussion. And we have 7 participants now, and we start with a short round of introductions, and each panelist briefly please introduce him or herself. And I would say, ladies first. We start with Helen and continue according to the agenda with Jürgen, Oliver, David, Klaus, and Martin. So please, Helen.
Thank you, Thea. And thank you everybody for having me here in our evening and your morning. My name is Helen Degeling and I work with Tony Knight. I'm the Director for Minerals Geoscience within the Geological Survey of Queensland in the Department of Resources. And I'm responsible for the work that we are doing to promote and support the understanding of critical minerals in Queensland and how to get those to market, basically how to get them out of the ground sustainably and then into useful places around the world.
Thank you, Helen. So, Jürgen.
Thank you very much, Sia. And yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. And thank you very much for all the participants that joined the webinar today. So I'm Jürgen Wolfstheib. I work for the German-Australian Chamber of Industry and Commerce. And at the Chamber, I am managing the Competence Centre for Mining and Resources, which is a project funded by the German government, bringing together German mining suppliers with the Australian mining industry on the one hand, but also providing information to the about raw materials in Australia to the German industry as off-takers of those materials. And it's really, I'm excited to be part of this today because I see a lot of opportunities in the future, not only between Australia and Germany in general, but especially with Queensland and Germany as well.
Thank you, Jürgen. Oliver, I didn't see you, but I think you are around.
Yeah, jumping in now. Hey, can you see me?
Hey,
see you beautifully. Yeah, good day to everybody. Thanks, Linda and Sia, having me here on this panel. Very delighted and big pleasure of having obviously very experienced industry colleagues around. So very much looking forward to the exchange. To myself, 15 years in the minerals and metals commodity sector in different roles on technology and project development, metals trading and recycling industries across the board. I'm currently one of the 4 managing directors of Cronimet Holding. We are a family-owned company headquartered in Karlsruhe, Germany. And I think we can proudly say we are one of the globally leading metal recyclers all around stainless and specialty steel in all its ingredients. So nickel, chromium, molybdenum, and other critical minerals as they have been highlighted by Tony already, cobalt, titanium, and tungsten. And tungsten brought us to Queensland. So we are currently involved in 2 activities in Queensland. One is the partnership with EQ Resources, where I'm also delighted to be part of the board of the company. It's an ASX listed entity. And the other one is with Pure Battery Technologies, a very interesting venture. I'm also a member of the board of the European branch there, looking at battery materials. So yeah, look forward to the exchange.
Thanks, Oliver. Next one is David from Austrade.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Sai, for introducing me. My name is David Ari. I work for the Australian Trade and Investment Commission based out of Frankfurt, but I'm actually in Berlin and work very closely with the embassy team and obviously TIQ in London on helping companies from Germany and other Central European markets investing in Australia. My focus areas are hydrogen and critical minerals, so I'm very excited to also be here today to learn more about Queensland's specific offer and to understand what questions from German interested parties might be. Thank you for having me on the panel.
Thank you, David. So the next one is Mr. Klaus Stöckmann, please.
Yeah, good morning, everyone in Europe, and good evening, Australia. First, thank you for the opportunity to join the round table. I'm Klaus Stöckmann and Deputy Managing Director of VDMA Mining. We are part of the German Engineering Association VDMA. Within VDMA Mining, we represent 145 manufacturers of mining equipment. They stand for just under 3.4 billion euros turnover, and the export to Australia is around 81.5 million euros last year. We have close ties to Australia for many years, and actually we are working on a development of communication standardization to facilitate the automation, the autonomous operations, things like that. These are the actual technological developments, and if you want to if you want to know more of what we are doing, yeah, you may ask me later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stöckmann. And finally, Mr. Martin Wedig, please.
Yes, hello to everybody. Martin Wedig. I'm representing the German Federation of International Mining. So we have about 60 companies in our organization, largely focusing on servicing in mining, from exploration over mining to sustainable cleanup of mine sites. Sustainability is one of the aspects where German companies have developed certain expertise, which also can be exported to international countries. And so we certainly also have the one or the other company who is really active in mining. We are following up with the so-called chain building within our organization, so from servicing to mining. And if there's interest, we may discuss this in depth later on. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you all for the introduction. Yeah, a lot has happened in the commodity markets in recent years. If you only look at the battery raw materials, for example, where Australia is an important producer of lithium, nickel, cobalt, and manganese, and has interesting graphite projects in the pipeline, we see a strong trend towards further processing along the value chain in the country. And my question here is, will this trend continue, and where do you see next business opportunities arise? So everyone who would like to add to that answer is very welcome. And we have some questions.
Perhaps if I can start off, good question. And if I just pick one commodity that's very topical for us in Queensland, it's vanadium. I mentioned in the presentation that we have very large stores, very large resources of vanadium. A number of companies are out there. They've explored, they've proven up the resource, they're going moving into development. The issue that they have is that they're small companies and they need to go and develop their capability to develop the next stage of development. They're very keen to do that. They're very energetic and they're keen, but they're cash poor. But the idea that we have in government and with industry too, is to effectively get them to work as a consortium, such that there's a group of suppliers fitting into common infrastructure that I think lends itself, I think, to in our ideal situation, to local manufacture, local use of that material. I mentioned too the idea of mineral miles, to borrow the term from the food miles used elsewhere. The idea that we should only ship the least amount of product that we can, the refined product ideally. I guess that's in the back of our mind, to try and minimise the need to transport bulk materials as much as possible. So the question becomes, whereabouts along that value add chain do we step off and export product? That's a very topical conversation in government here in Queensland now.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Saya, may I have a comment as well?
Sure.
Okay, so I just want to highlight one issue. Certainly the German industry and also the European industry in the larger sense is interested in takeoff of new minerals, especially the so-called technology minerals. Tony, you have referred to that. But a major factor is always investment into mines and getting into desired countries like Australia, where you have all the minerals, obviously, and where you have opportunities to develop it. And then the distance to transport it over or process is somewhere in Asia, and then transport it over to Germany and Europe. So there is a new trend, and I just want to highlight this because this is not, this is bounded to Queensland as well, that there are a number of Australian companies are now coming over to Europe and invest in Europe to develop larger deposits here. Especially on lithium or tin, which is also required for battery technologies. To name two is European lithium, for example, or European metals, which are also part of our organization, but they are Australian-based companies. And I'm really happy for this development, that because it shows this goes into both directions. German companies are going over to Australia, as well as Australian companies are coming over to Europe. I mean, these companies now working in Austria and Czech Republic, but they have certainly found Germany as one of the major base for all the mineral issues in Europe. Thanks.
I think that idea of exchange and interplay is certainly very welcome. I agree.
May I see, Oliver here, may I add another aspect? I'm sure you have many other questions still lined up, but and apologies, Tony, I probably spoiled a geologist in the group here now. But I think when we talk about resources, one is obviously the minerals resources, but as an entrepreneur, I think you can also look at the human resource, and there I can confirm, and I think Tony highlighted in his presentation, the partnership approach, what we very much appreciate, and where I think there's really great potential, because Queensland specifically has a high profile educational and research sector, is to really make use of those resources, despite the fact that maybe your mine, your deposit, your operation lays somewhere else. Nickel, it's found in Indonesia, New Caledonia, elsewhere. But I believe specifically for the battery materials that you have highlighted there, Shia, in the beginning, the University of Queensland is probably one of the best hydrometallurgical, has one of the best hydrometallurgical institutes, which gained a lot of experience, and people from all over the world are coming to Brisbane to get advice. So I guess that's something worth highlighting. It's not only the metal in the ground, but it's also the people on the ground that greatly make a difference in Queensland and elsewhere in Australia, obviously. But that's something to be worth noting.
Yeah, that's very true, Oliver. Thank you. And you're right. There's also across Australia quite a depth capability in a number of areas around the Future Battery Industries Research Centre, for example, is, as the name suggests, purely focused on battery development. There's a lot of activity here in Australia on that front, in Queensland too.
Martin had another question here in the chat function, who was asking, are there any further programs by the Australian government to focus on technology minerals? And Helen was asking, and maybe you can discuss a little bit the Critical Minerals Facilitation Office. Maybe you can explain that a little bit. I think it's pretty new, just a year old. Could you get some information on that, please?
Yeah, most certainly. You're right. So I think the fact that that office was set up last year, and you're right, it's just over a year old, is really indicative of where the Australian government is at and its thinking. It's very, very keen. It knows it has a large endowment of the minerals. It knows that the energy transition is going on, and that batteries particularly will feature heavily into the future in terms of demand for minerals, but also generation too, of course, solar and wind particularly. But really, we're very keen to also make sure that as a country, we plan for the future and that we plan for some industries to decline. So there's no secret that we have a large coal industry here that's in decline. So, you know, we want to make sure that we are looking to the future. And we prefer, certainly in Queensland, whilst we have a large coal sector here, it really is, the future is very much around the energy transition and the minerals that support that. We see that very, very clearly. So I think the governments at national and state level are very much aligned in that thinking too. We can't sit still and rest on our past successes of industries. We need to develop industries of the future. So there's a lot of activity going into that space. The Critical Minerals Office is one. It's designed to really help industry get up and get going. The name Facilitation Office, it speaks to that. We're really trying to find what needs to be done to develop the supply chains. And I use the term supply ecosystem because there are not just technical and commercial factors to think about. There's also sustainability factors like traceability and provenance, for example. Now, that's a fairly new area of industry activity, using blockchain and those sorts of things. So to roll that at scale across the various commodities that we're talking about and making it a routine part of our business is very much what we have to do. And there is work in that front. So that's one of the things that office is doing, for example. But it's more generally around trying to develop the new industries. The companion piece to that Critical Minerals Office is a modern manufacturing initiative. It's a program of government funding through the federal government to really, as the name suggests, once again, help industry, manufacturing industry get up and get going. That one of the streams of funding support is around critical minerals. So that talks, I think, ideally to battery technology, but also, once again, at the generation side, photovoltaics, windmills. But there are so many battery technologies under development. So there's a lot of demand for different minerals. So battery technology particularly, I think, is of interest to government at national and state level. So that office there, Critical Minerals Office, Modern Manufacturing Initiative, the Research Centre, all talk to that.
Great. There is Mr. Klaus Stöckmann. He likes to add something to the discussion.
I've got one question to Tony. Are there special technical requirements with regard to the deposit or the geographical situation or environment? What is important for the suppliers to know about the deposits of this kind of raw material?
That's a good question, and I guess the simple answer is they're all different. The beauty of some of them is that the mineral processing, the metallurgy is not very complex. So I'll speak, I guess, flippantly here that with vanadium, for example, we understand that the mode of occurrence makes the recovery a fairly straightforward process. Cobalt is a bit different. different metallurgical processes required. So that's part of the work to do with, as Oliver mentioned, University of Queensland, with the metallurgy department, and there are others too around Australia. So, there's no single answer I can give you. I mean, but what I can say is that Queensland and Australia have a depth of knowledge in mineral processing through the entire span of, from extraction through to put it onto a ship or to use it in a manufacture process. So we have that knowledge base. So yeah, I think it's something that we can handle pretty well. I'm seeing quite a few hands up here. See, can you see those too?
Yes.
Ambassador Green, for example, has his hand up.
Yeah, thanks very much. Thanks, Tony. I just want to back Tony up on what he said about the Critical Minerals Facilitation Office. As he said, the focus here is on facilitation. We in Australia understand that business needs to lead and government needs support. And we also understand that many of the important levers are in state hands as opposed to federal hands. So the objective of the Facilitation Office is to lead development on critical minerals projects in Australia, but lead very closely in close collaboration both with state governments and industry. So what can they do? They can help investors identify what options there are. They can attempt to clear away boundaries when they exist by connecting potential investors, potential project facilitators with the right arms of state or federal funding. They are particularly interested in projects of strategic importance. And as Tony said, many of those will be projects which go up the value chain to some extent or another. And also they can connect potential projects to the possible sources of Australian funding support, which includes Export Finance Australia, the Northern Australia Infrastructure Fund, and some of the funds held within our Department of Defence. So that's that is the Facilitation Office. Tony's dead right to connect this to the work that we're doing on modern manufacturing. And I know this is very strange to a German audience, but the last couple of decades of Australian industry policy has been very much focused on primary industry, where we clearly have major comparative advantages in resources, energy, food and fibre, and also tertiary industry, where we have big advantages in terms of tourism, business services and international education. The Morrison government last year has decided to focus a bit more on manufacturing, but not all manufacturing. We have had a shipbuilding industry in this country, or large shipbuilding industry in this country, and that is gone. We've had a car industry, and that is very largely gone. What we are looking for now is industry niches where Australia has a particular comparative advantage. And typically they will be because of our underlying comparative advantages in food and beverage, in resources, energy, but also in fields like clean tech, defence and space. As Tony says, the critical minerals discussion fits very neatly within our broader objective to put new focus on manufacturing in Australia, which again will be industry-led, but which governments, including state and federal governments, will have a big role in supporting. For us in Germany, what my team is doing is firstly feeding into those developing the modern manufacturing study in Australia. What are the sources of German success? And the next set of activities for me, which we'll be rolling out in the course of this year, is to explain to German companies and indeed German government entities what opportunities the modern manufacturing strategy has for German entities in Australia. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Green. It was David. David, you wanted to add also.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Ambassador, for making those points. I just wanted to add specifically that you can also engage with the Critical Facilitation Office and Austrade in IRMA and other forum that have been mentioned by German government at the top of this discussion. So we are active across Europe in these fora and with the industry bodies. If you feel like engaging them in that format other than directly. And just to add that they also publish a prospectus which outlines all the specific opportunities and particular resources and minerals which we can share after this presentation, of course.
Mr. Green just mentioned manufacturing, and I heard something about a modern manufacturing initiatives. Maybe someone can comment on that?
Ambassador, is that one for you to take on, if you don't mind?
Yes, of course, but I don't know that I have a lot more to add to what I previously said, which is that our modern manufacturing initiative is going to be focused on niches where Australia has particular expertise, and it's going to be industry-led. It will be supported financially by government, but we are at the moment in deep discussion with state governments and with industry on which particular subsectors it makes sense for Australia to put new effort into. And once that effort is done, I will be engaging with German corporates and government sector on how Germany can engage more deeply with our modern manufacturing strategy, which, as Tony says, has a very important element related to critical minerals.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask Oliver a question. Oliver, Cronimet invested into the Mount Carvin tungsten project in Queensland recently. Can you please share some of your experience with us?
Yeah, sure. Certainly. I mean, I guess from a timing point of view, it wasn't probably the best. It was right before the COVID pandemic spread it all across the world. But I guess even during this period, the last 18 months, I guess we had quite some success there. We have had an historical mine site with a good infrastructure in place up in far north Queensland. So I guess that is always something that has to be considered. The infrastructure or the distance, let's put it this way, obviously on such a big continent is quite big, and to bring people and machinery in can be quite costly. But again, luckily we started a project off on very good infrastructure, very good access to site. The site had actually been operated as a quarry for the last 20 years. So they have been using historical mine waste to produce aggregate materials, to build highways, etc., etc. And we found it quite interesting to combine advanced technologies like sensor-based sorting and other technologies from Europe, from Germany, by the way, that allows us to extract tungsten from this waste material, which was left over from operations 40 years ago. So the entrance point here, and that really sits in the DNA of our company, Cronimet, as a recycling company or recycling-minded and sustainable mining is something that we obviously have as sitting as competences in the organization. We put a team in place. We have a very strong Australian partner, and we made it through the pandemic and still ramped up production. And we are currently sitting there being in a position to claim that we are extracting a critical mineral such as tungsten from a historical waste dump. And obviously that is the entry point. And we are looking forward to also look at primary resources in the region, far north Queensland. When we talk about tin and tungsten, Tony's map has shown it before. We believe there's strong mineralization in the area. So happy to invite partners to participate and expand the production of tungsten. We are currently the only primary tungsten producer in Australia, while Australia is sitting on the second largest resource worldwide. So there's obviously still a long way to go to fight back leadership for everybody in the sector. Yeah? But overall, again, it has been a great experience. I just would like to highlight that the industry bodies and also the government agencies are of extremely important and great support. Everything what has been mentioned in terms of funding the MMI but there's also a round going on currently, which is the Collaborative Research Fund, which is already in the round 11, I guess. And meanwhile, so over many years already, the government had been supporting research or collaboration between research institutes and private industry players. And I can just recommend for our friends from the Engineering Association and the machinery side to really look up, and I'm sure that David and Jürgen can tell us all where we find this information, that there's great projects being implemented at the moment which require new and advanced technologies. And I guess you'll find some interesting projects on those lists. So yeah, I always, again, thank the industry, let's say associations and government agencies on really taking that very serious. And I guess as a globally operating company, I would say that this is really a premium service that we see in Queensland and Australia generally.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Oliver. And I think, Helen, you would like to add something to what just Oliver said.
Thanks, Sia. Yes, I just wanted to expand on what Oliver was saying about getting critical minerals from mine waste and that concept of recycling old mining material or old waste, essentially, and getting value out of it, and particularly value that can feed into green technologies, which is a beautiful story, I think, and it's something that within the Queensland government we're spending a lot of time, effort and funds on. So we have a very large program looking at mine waste all across Queensland, and working with a number of different companies, but also international organisations who have become interested in understanding, you know, how to get value from an old mine, working with currently operating mines as well. We have a lot of very large copper mines, and there's a lot of cobalt associated with that copper. So one of the big things is to understand how we can get the cobalt that is in the waste, but is a very important part of lithium-ion batteries, for example, how we can get that out and out to market, and while we're doing it, clean up old sites and sort of bring mining into the circular economy a little bit. So that's a really important part of the work that we're doing within Queensland, and it is something that we are actively partnering on with international organisations. So certainly welcome any action on that front.
Thank you, Helen. And I think when I hear what you just both said, I mean, technology is key. I remember when I was in Australia, I think 2013 or 2015, and we also visited Mount Carbine and Wolfram Camp. There was German technology, a sorting machine, X-ray sorting machine for Wolfram processing. And I'm not quite sure, but yeah, I mean, Germany is a world-class exporter of mining equipment and technology. And maybe Jürgen, you can comment on that. I mean, with all the technology we have here in Germany and with all the projects in Australia, I mean, matchmaking, I mean, it's sometimes difficult, but looking ahead, I think there are several opportunities in that area.
Thank you, Sia, and you're absolutely right. There are really a lot of opportunities, and the German mining supply industry is really strong in Australia. So it's not only the classical mining suppliers that are only active in the mining industry, but companies from all sorts of industries supply into the Australian mining industry. So I did a little count a couple of months ago, and I found roughly 120 or 130 German companies active in Australia in the mining sector. And I'm really excited about Australian mining industry going more and more into the processing sector, because this is also, for example, when you talk about the energy that is required to process those materials in the later stages, German companies can supply highly efficient technologies, so that really then makes sure that the processing is happening in the most sustainable way possible. And yes, matchmaking is difficult, but I'm trying my best to connect German companies and the Australian mining industry.
And you do a good job. Thanks, Jürgen. David, sorry, I missed one question. You wanted to add something earlier.
No, it's already done. Thank you. I think there is a question on the Q&A though, which I'm happy for someone from the panel to answer. I can only add, so it's about competitiveness of manufacturing in China versus Australia around critical minerals processing. And I mean, to kind of follow on from what our ambassador said earlier, basically this manufacturing initiative is looking at exactly these questions. It's in the late stage of its policy finding and of its outreach. We don't have a concrete answer to that yet, but we are looking into that, and that's specifically why we are actually looking at a manufacturing initiative to answer these questions around competitiveness and where the Australian government and the Australian market thinks it needs to pay more attention or maybe support more. So those questions are being looked at, but there aren't any definitive answers yet, is maybe as far as I can take that here.
Yeah, I think on that question around the critical mineral value chains and the issue of costs, I think it's probably fair to say that we will struggle to compete on costs alone. You know, we're an advanced economy with all the safeguards that go with that around safety, environment, you know, respect for Indigenous people. That all comes at a cost. But I think that so we can't compete with China, where, you know, I guess maybe they've got different standards or attitudes towards things like rare earth element processing. But I think the beauty, so to speak, here is that, and to use that common term now, to build back better, if we're building new supply chains, we can build them in the most efficient way in terms of energy and water. We can use them, build them in the least polluting way too. We can also look for innovation. That's why we're so keen to test these ideas around using, you know, plants or biological agents to try and recover minerals. Maybe it won't be at the same rate as we used to, but if it's, you know, much less energy costs and environmental impact, maybe that balance then truly talks to sustainable prosperity. So I think this is a long-term vision we have to have here, is around optimizing our past focus on costs as the #1 priority versus the broader weighing up of, you know, people, planet, profit, and progress. So I think there'll be a change, and I think some of the capital markets, investment markets, with a focus on ESG, you know, environmental, social, and corporate governance, that's starting to play out more and more. So I guess my response would be, yeah, today we can't compete on cost, but the opportunities in front of us to develop the supply chains that will be optimized in every sense of the word. And we'll compete, I think, on the, you know, not only the what we supply, but how. The how, I think, is equally important into the future.
Thank you, Tony. Jürgen, you wanted to add something, right?
Yeah, thank you also, Tony, for pointing all of that out. I want to give a little example of what we experienced just recently. We, as the German Chamber and as the Competence Centre for Mining and Resources, were approached by a German company, a rather small, not really small, a Mittelstand company in Germany, 3,000 employees producing electric engines. So it's not small, but, you know, the hidden champions in Germany sometimes are quite big, but we're not well known. And they use rare earths for their electric engines, and they have a new strategy in place where they want to go away from rare earths made in China or mined and processed in China. And so they reached out to us and are asking for help to connect them to Australian potential producers of critical minerals or rare earths. So I think for this company, the price in the end is probably not going to be the deciding factor. They want to go away from China produced rare earths, so they will do it if there is supply from Australia, and that's where we hope that we will see supply out of Australia rather sooner than later, because then I think the demand is there already. And the question I have in regards to that is, because it is a rather small company, this company in Germany will not be able to do an offtake agreement with an Australian company, or even provide funding for the project to go ahead. So my question is, how could we handle that in the future? Could we like bundle the demand of a couple of German companies, so that, yeah, we would be able to provide funding for the Australian project? Or is there any type of support from Australian, or in this case Queensland side, that could mean such a project would go ahead?
It's a good question, because I gave the example of the vanadium supply chain we're working to develop. It is exactly the same sort of model you've described, where the vanadium industry is not established yet, but there are companies who have defined resources in the ground and who have got plans, and quite well progressed plans, to develop it through the approval stage. But they're what I call these junior companies. And in the area I'm thinking of, there are 5 companies. So of themselves, they're probably too small to attract the funding support or to enter into an offtake agreement from a major supplier. As a consortium, it's different. And that's what we've talked to that industry participants about, a consortium approach where they work together, and we have, for example, multi-user infrastructure or common infrastructure. I think that model is one that probably has application in this critical minerals and the economy space, because the minerals themselves are in many cases distributed more dilutely than, let's say, copper or zinc, where often you've got a massive deposit that'll sustain a big investment, a long offtake. It's different for rare earths, for example. While we have a lot of them in Queensland, in any one place, they're distributed. So what we'll have to do is find ways to minimize that capital cost for those companies. And the way to do that is collaboration and sort of that consortium approach. So I think there's different ways of looking at how to do business in future.
Thank you. Martin, I think you had a question, or you would like to add something?
Yeah, I would like to add something. Thank you, Saya. So I would like to come back to the issue of niche manufacturing, which was pointed out by the Ambassador Green. Just also to get myself right, what is meant with it, as I understood him, it's not yet defined in which areas this niches could be. So, and if we look on the mining sphere and on the demand of our both economies, it would be certainly appropriate to have or to define niches in the mining process itself. And secondly, to define niches for manufacturing. And with manufacturing, I mean manufacturing of mining equipment. And as Germany has a larger number of small and medium enterprises, they are really depending on market. And so setting up a manufacturing site in Australia would require always a certain market. So I just want to give this hint in order to encourage you to check before you define some niches. I think interests from German companies would be high. Third one would be rehabilitation and environmental issues. So what Helen said, so-called green mining. And the fourth one, and this came out of Oliver Klein-Hempel, is the recycling issue, which also could be a niche manufacturer in some sorts. Thanks.
Yes, Mr. Green, please.
Let me talk a little bit more about modern manufacturing, and then I want to come back to the issue of competition with China. So just to be clear for the previous speaker, the government has identified 6 sectors in which we will look for these niches. And those sectors are resources, including critical minerals, food and beverage, medical, clean tech, defence, and space. And what the government is doing right now is engaging with Australian industry, and by that I don't just mean bodies that are incorporated in Australia, but it definitely includes multinationals, including German majors in Australia, engaging with them on which niches, which subsectors within these 6 spheres would make most sense for us to put more resources. Perhaps also there's another German angle to this, which is the modern manufacturing strategy comes out of a report which went to government, and I can't recall whether Jeff Connolly was the leader of that, but he was certainly on the report. Jeff is the Siemens representative in Australia. So there are German fingerprints all over this report already. And once we've done the next stage, which is to identify where Australian industry thinks this can most effectively get traction, I'll be circling back to German entities to see how they want to engage with it. On the question of competition with China, I think Tony and Jürgen have done a very good job already in reframing the question about whether this is purely just a matter of competition on price. And it's clear from what Tony said that many global firms are going to look for sustainable supply chains in the future, which I think will make Australia more competitive. But I think global majors will also look for secure supply chains, and they will be anxious about a future in which we have a single source supplier for many of the intermediate goods which derive out of critical minerals. And that is all the more so because these critical minerals are critical for many future-facing technologies, including many defence technologies and including many technologies which are critical for the development of our economies. Now, the United States and Japan are already in very close engagement with Australia on how our deposits can be developed in a way that helps ensure more vibrant supply chains regionally and globally. I don't think, to be fair, we've fully engaged Germany in that conversation yet. But one of my purposes of being involved in today was to get a better sense of the German conversation so that when we do go further down that strain, I understand better the sentiment from the German side.
Thank you very much. Very interesting discussion. Unfortunately, we run out of time. I guess there are more questions. So if you have more questions, please forward them to me or to Linda, and we try to answer them or forward them to the right person. Tony, I do have a last question before I hand over to Linda to sum up. So we published, in 2015, we published a handbook on almost 30 commodities, which might be of interest to the German industry. And the manual is outdated now. On your last slide, you showed 2 publications referring to investment opportunity. Do you update these publications on a regular basis?
Fortunately, no. They were done for, I guess, a special reason. But I think we should, going forward, because of the questions we have from people all around the world, that sort of information.
Okay. Thank you, Tony. Yeah, I would like to thank all the participants, especially Ambassador Green and Mr. Geckle, but also to all of you. And yeah, it's 10:30 now. I would like to hand over to Linda to sum up, and I'd like to thank you everybody for this first webinar, and I hope we can continue this in the future.
Thank you very much, Sire. And I would like to acknowledge Ambassador Green's presence today, which has been a real honour to have you with us, Ambassador. And thank you so much to our Chief Geologist from Queensland, Tony Knight, who once again always stimulates great inquisitiveness about what the new mineral economy means for building a new economy. And I always find that extremely engaging. I think the whole interest of securing supply of critical minerals using new methods for sourcing, processing and connecting with new supply chains will definitely require ongoing economic diplomacy to continue to build those important partnerships and the collaboration which we have heard today is already in place between Germany, Australia and specifically Queensland. The Green Deal, which is an overarching guiding policy across the EU, a very powerful policy, I think gels neatly with the principles and objectives of the new mineral economy strategy in Queensland. So please reach out to my office if anybody on our call today would like further information or engagement, but it's an absolute delight for Queensland, the Queensland government and our Queensland companies to partner and engage with Germany. And thank you to our partners for today's seminar. It's been a pleasure working with you, Sire, and thank you for your able chairmanship today. Have a lovely day.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you very much.